Hi there, Yosh Rao here from Field One Paintball. This video series is going to cover the general maintenance and some troubleshooting tips for your Field One force. As always, practice safe marker handling whenever you're going to work on your force. Okay, this next section of our general maintenance videos is going to cover maintenance of the eye area and the nucleus engine. This type of maintenance really doesn't have to be performed that frequently. We usually recommend to people every 20,000 to 40,000 shots. For some players that's a couple of weekends. For some players that might be their full paintball season. But we found that the nucleus engine just really doesn't need a lot of maintenance and doesn't have to be disassembled or greased or have seals changed on a regular basis. It's a workhorse. It'll just keep going for you. If you do experience some sort of downgrade in performance, then that might be the appropriate time to get into the nucleus engine and just apply a little more grease. But otherwise, the nucleus engine is designed to just keep running for you. So we're going to start off with looking at the eye area. We do that by taking our 5/64 Allen wrench and removing the eye cover. When we remove the eye cover, we'll see that there is an eye board and our rubber detent there. So those will simply pull out with your finger. You can inspect your eye board. These are the lenses that communicate with each other through the eye ports. You just want to make sure that there's no paint on this side of the board, no paint or moisture on this side of the board. These are brand new, so they look very clean, but you can just wipe these off with like a soft cloth or something like that. Next, we're going to pull our rubber detent, which is housed here. Now this, you can either use a tool and get underneath it like that, or you can push it out from inside the breech with your finger. Again, this is a new detent, so it's in pristine shape. These don't have to be replaced that often, but if you do this maintenance and you see that it's degraded or the tip has worn down, you can just grab a spare one out of your kit and replace it. These will actually even work pretty well, even if the tip has worn down. But if you detect that it's degraded, just replace it. It's a cheap wearable part. Now we're going to put it back together. So we're going to drop the rubber detent in place. We're going to add our eye board, making sure that the contacts here are in contact with the bridge board here. Then we're going to attach our eye cover. Quick and easy. Now you've serviced your eye area, you can do the same on the other side. As a general rule, you don't have to clean this all the time, but when you check eye function and if you see any type of fault on your OLED screen, it's a good time to just pull these eye covers off, take a look at the boards, clean up the area if necessary, and that usually addresses and fixes the issue. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pull the nucleus engine from the marker. We're going to re-grease some areas of the nucleus engine. We don't have to totally break it down. Typically, we don't have to replace any seals. It's just a matter of adding a little bit more grease, and then the engine will continue to function at high performance. So to pull that out, we lift the back cap and then just kind of give that a pull. The nucleus engine comes out. Now, the areas of the nucleus engine that we want to add lube to are going to be your bolt stem, your exterior O-rings. These are 21s, and this is a 20. And then we're going to pull these two halves apart, and we're going to add some grease to the ram shaft. It's that simple. There doesn't have to be any replacement. It's just a matter of adding a little more grease and checking it out, making sure that there's not paint around your bolt tip or dirt that has settled in there after weekends and weekends of playing. So to pull these halves apart, we just unscrew them. Now again, we can see our bolt stem and our ram shaft, they're connected. So when you actuate this, you can actually see that they are connected and they move together. And we're going to add a little bit of grease to the ram O-ring here, just kind of smooth it over, and a little bit here on the bolt stem. And that's going to be sufficient. Now we can put our engine back together by screwing the two halves together. When we do this, we want to make sure that we go nice and snug with the engine halves. They'll basically come to a hard stop, and that's good. There shouldn't be a gap here between the engine halves, and that's your typical maintenance. Now, two other things to check out when you have your Nucleus engine out of your force are going to be checking your pillow tip insert. Now, this helps to cushion the ball, and this is a big reason why the force does so well with fragile paint. If this rubber tip is degraded in any way, let's say there's a chunk missing out of it, or it looks swollen or feels loose, it's probably time to replace that. It's a wearable part. It's fairly easy to replace. We'll do a video to show you how to do that as well. But you can use your 5/64 Allen wrench in the tip, and it'll unscrew from the bolt tip here. The other thing to check out are to make sure that your detaining pin that holds the back cap to the back block is nice and snug, and that your mounting screws for the back block to the ram housing are nice and snug as well. We need all three of these screws to be nice and snug in order for the bumpers in the engine to work properly. So this is a new engine, everything checks out, looks good, we've re-lubed it. We're gonna add a little bit of lube to the outside O-rings here, smooth it over. You don't have to gob it on there. It's really just a light coating to make sure that these can slide into the force body very easily. And then usually whatever I have left on my fingers, I add to the bolt stem or the bolt O-rings. Now we can just reapply the Nucleus engine to the body, click down the back cap, and we're good to go. Okay, this video is going to cover replacing a damaged or worn pillow tip insert from your Nucleus engine bolt. I've got an example here of two bolt tips. One has a pretty severely degraded pillow tip insert, and one has a brand new one. You can probably see the difference pretty clearly. I mean, this one's missing a chunk, looks a little swollen. This doesn't have to be replaced that often, but like we said, usually these will last 20 to 40,000 shots, which is a long time. If you notice that your pillow tip insert looks like this one, it's probably time to replace it. If it looks like this one still, you're probably good to go. To remove it, you can use a 5/64 Allen wrench, and you can insert that Allen wrench right into the center of the pillow tip insert. There's a broach in there that it'll fit. You can feel it kind of click into place. And oftentimes you can just turn these out. So you turn it counterclockwise, and the pillow tip insert will unscrew from the bolt face. Few turns and you have it removed, and you can simply add your new pillow tip insert back in there. It's really important when you add your new pillow tip insert to not over tighten this part. This rubber pillow tip insert is injection molded over a brass crown screw that, if it's over tightened, that brass crown screw can break, in which case you need to then remove the broken screw. If you have a hard time turning this out, if you meet a lot of resistance when you're trying to turn this part out, you can remove the O-rings and add a little bit of heat to the bolt stem right here, either using a lighter or a torch, usually not more than 5 seconds. And what that'll do is it'll soften up the blue Loctite, or the temporary thread locking agent that is applied to this part from the factory. Again, when you reinstall, you don't want to over tighten this part. And if you do have a little bit of blue Loctite, a tiny amount on the threads here will help to keep that in place. Otherwise, you can just turn it until it is nice and snug. Don't over crank it, and you've got your new pillow tip insert installed. All right, now we're going to cover diagnosing and repairing a leak from the ASA or HPR area. So, we're gonna first determine exactly which area of the ASA the leak is coming from, and that'll help us to kind of attack the problem and have a more directed approach. We're gonna start by removing the grip panels. And then we're going to talk about, once you've figured out where the location of the leak is, how to address it. So if you have a leak coming from the ASA knob area, which is essentially going to be the seam of where the ASA knob meets the ASA body, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to determine if the leak stops once you turn the knob to the on position. So in the on position, if the leak has stopped, you may have a tank pin that is sitting proud of the tank regulator face and activating as soon as you have screwed the bottle into the ASA. Many of the tank manufacturers have a simple solution for this issue. They offer a shorter tank pin. If a shorter tank pin is not offered by your tank regulator manufacturer, just contact the Field One Service Center and we can help you out with the issue. Now, if the leak persists after you have turned the ASA knob to the on position, so it leaks, then you turn it on, it continues to leak. The first thing that we would want to check to make sure is that the ASA main seal is snug in the ASA. The main seal is this brass hexagon shaped piece here. Obviously you take our tank off, and to check this part, we're going to use a 1/2 inch nut driver. You can also use a socket. A 1/2 inch socket with like a 1/4 inch drive is a good tool. Basically any 1/2 inch socket with a thin wall so that you can reach in here and hook onto that ASA main seal. So we just want to make sure that that is tight. If it was loose and you tighten it up, then I would just retest it with your tank and see if that addressed the leak issue. All right, so now if we want to remove the brass main seal, we're going to use our nut driver again and just engage the main seal, unscrew it, and that should drop out. All right, so once you've got your main seal assembly removed from the ASA, you can see that the filter is still in place, and you can see that this main seal assembly is actually made up of 3 parts with 2 O-rings. So in order to separate these parts, you can simply push the activation pin with your 5/64 Allen wrench, and by turning it to the side, you can actually disengage that main seal retainer plug as well. So those are a couple of parts there. And if you look inside, there is a 005 O-ring, and around the threads is a 011 O-ring. So to resolve this leak, all we have to do is replace these 2 O-rings, and then we are going to reassemble our main seal. When you put this activation pin back in, you can see that there is a round end and a flat end. The flat end should face your tank. So the round end goes in first. And both of these O-rings, once you've replaced them, should get a pretty heavy amount of grease before you install this back into your ASA. Now to reinstall, I'm going to use my 1/2 inch nut driver again. I can kind of drop that into the ASA and screw it into place. Once it reaches where it wants to stop, I'm going to put it just a little bit beyond snug to make sure that it stays in place. Now you can retest with your tank and your ASA knob leak issue should be resolved. Now the next area that we are going to look at is if you have a leak from the velocity adjustment hole of your ASA body. This leak is very rare, but can be caused by a bad seal in the HPR. The 2 seals that hold air from this area are the 1x12 on the bottom of the brass HPR and the 011 that's inside the brass HPR housing. So to access that, we're going to disengage these ASA mounting screws. I use a ball end 1/8 because it's a little faster, but you can use the short end of an L-shaped 1/8 as well. Once you've got those 2 screws out, then your ASA with the HPR attached will just pull directly down. Now this is your piston. You can leave that in place. This is part of your purge valve. You can also leave that in place. Make sure you don't, smash those two parts or foul the sealing surfaces of either of those. So just lay your force down and you can push the HPR housing out of the cam drive ASA just like that. Now the O-rings that I was referencing, if you do have a leak from the velocity adjustment hole, would be the two bottom O-rings. So this 1x12, if air is allowed to escape over this O-ring, then it's going to come out through the velocity hole. And the other one is actually inside the HPR assembly. And if you disengage your velocity adjuster, you'll see that there are two O-rings inside. You've got a 12 that sits in the upper groove and an 11 that sits in the lower groove inside. If you have a leak coming through your velocity adjustment hole, change out this 1x12 or change out this 011 inside of there, reassemble, and you should be good to go. Now earlier you probably saw me remove this O-ring from the bottom of the adjuster. This O-ring is a 1x4.5, and all this O-ring does is it just acts as a bumper so that if you adjust your velocity too high, this O-ring will basically engage and not allow you to go any higher. So it's just kind of a fail-safe that we have in the system to not put too much pressure into the gun. So now we re-engage our adjuster. And the way that I like to get this set up, if I've taken this assembly apart, is I like to basically adjust this stainless steel adjuster to be about flush or flat with the top of the brass HPR housing. That's a good starting point. It's not going to be high velocity or high pressure. And then once you get this all installed again, you can head to the chronograph and adjust your pressures up so that you get to the chronograph speed you need. Replace those O-rings, give the outside of your HPR a little bit of grease, and you can slide this back into the ASA, just like that. And you're ready to mount your ASA and your HPR back onto the marker and get it tested. When you are tightening these ASA mounting screws, make sure that you get them nice and snug so that the ASA and HPR can't vibrate loose while you're using your force. Okay, now we're ready to go back out and test your force. Get it chronoed. All right, the next area of the ASA and HPR that we're going to address, if you have a leak coming from this small bleed hole above where the tank screws into the ASA, that means that we probably have a bad seal with the 012 O-ring inside the HPR housing. To address that, we're going to drop the ASA and HPR from the force grip frame. Oops. So undo your mounting screws here. Now if you have a leak coming from this bleed hole at the bottom rear of your grip frame, you may also experience velocity fluctuations. So it's a good idea that if you detect a leak, even if it's very slight, that you address it right away, because that's going to ensure that your force is still running at peak performance and you get good velocity consistency. So now we've undone our mounting screws. Again, we can just drop the ASA and HPR from the force grip frame, and we're going to push the HPR housing out of the ASA so that we can access it. And again, we're going to want to pull the stainless steel adjuster out of the housing, and we do that simply by unscrewing it with your velocity adjuster tool. See, that comes right out. And if you look inside of your HPR housing, you'll see that there are two grooves. The bottom groove houses the 011 O-ring, but the one that we're going to change out is the 012, which is inside of this brass housing in the upper groove, just past the threads here. So you can use a small tool or a pick to gently pull that O-ring out. And then we're going to add a new O-ring, and you can do that by just using, the back end of a swab or even an Allen wrench to just push it into place. And then once we've got the new O-ring back into that groove, we want to add a thin layer of grease all the way around the O-ring so that that stainless steel adjuster can slide right back into place. So now we add our stainless steel adjuster. We're going to use our velocity adjuster tool to screw that into place. And again, whenever we reassemble the force HPR housing with the adjuster, the best starting point is probably where you get the stainless steel adjuster flush with the top of the brass housing. That'll ensure that you're not putting too much pressure into your marker when you first air it up, and then you can adjust your velocity up at the chrono range from there. So now we're back together. Make sure that there's some grease on these outside 1x12s and reinsert your HPR housing back into the ASA. Now, to finish up, we're going to add our ASA assembly back to the grip frame, add our mounting screws, make sure those screws are nice and snug, and then we can screw in our tank and make sure that we have resolved the issue. If you have resolved the issue and there is no longer a leak from that bleed hole, it's time to just head to the chrono and make sure that you're chronoed in, and then go enjoy your day. All right, now we are going to cover possible engine cycle issues with your Nucleus engine or a sudden drop-off of velocity. If your force has a sudden drop-off in performance, that could be described as a skipped shot, where the solenoid fires and delivers air to the engine, but the bolt does not fully cycle. There may be an issue with one of the seals in the Nucleus engine. On occasion, we have seen one of the seals that separates extension force air from retraction force air fail or get damaged, which can lead to incomplete cycling of the Nucleus engine bolt. Here are some easy ways to get your Nucleus engine back on track. If the engine fails to fully cycle, but resolves temporarily by removing the engine and putting it back in the marker, it is most likely that there is a 021 O-ring on the outside of the engine that needs to be changed out. The 021 O-rings that separate these opposing air forces are the first, second, third, and fourth 021 O-rings as you move from the front of the engine to the rear. Be mindful that the O-ring at the front of the volume chamber is a 020 and does not contribute to this issue. Change these 4 O-rings with some fresh 021 O-rings and apply new grease before retesting the marker. If the engine cycling issue persists after you have changed these 4 021 O-rings on the outside of the engine, the next step is to separate the engine halves and remove the bolt from the ram so that you can access the inside of the brass shutoff. You can remove the bolt tip from the ram using your tool in the back of the ram and untwisting the bolt from the ram shaft. Then the ram will pull directly out of the volume chamber and shut off. There is a small blue bumper that you can actually just keep in place on the ram shaft so you don't lose track of it. And then you can see directly into the brass shutoff. If you want to remove the brass shutoff from the volume chamber, you can simply push it out and you can have full access to it. Now, when you look inside the brass shutoff, you want to make sure that the 011 U-cups, which are on this fatter end of the brass shutoff, are concentric and look smooth on the inside. If you can see that the 011 U-cup is not fully seated, then you can use the end of a blunt tool and some grease to push it back into place. Essentially, you just want to make sure that these U-cups are fully seated and give a smooth and uniform surface to seal against the ram shaft when the engine is operating. If you see that one of the seals is twisted or not fully seated into the groove, use your tool to try to get it in place. And if the U-cup won't create a uniform sealing surface on the inside with some reasonable effort, then remove the problem U-cup and install a new 011 U-cup seal. Then you can reassemble your Nucleus engine and retest the marker. Ensure that your blue bumper is still in place on the ram shaft when you assemble the front half of the engine. Once we have the bolt tip screwed onto the ram shaft, I'm going to use a tool to make sure that those two pieces are joined properly. Now we get nice cycling there. We can attach the two engine halves, apply a small amount of grease to these external 21s and the front 20. And you're ready to reassemble the engine into the marker and retest it. Thanks for watching our videos. If you have any other questions about your Field One force, feel free to contact us through the Field One website or give us a call at the Field One Service Center.